welcome and happy Tuesday, everybody, to the Safe Communities Committee meeting. Sorry for getting started a few minutes late. We've got, I believe, every single council member on the meeting today, and so I want to make sure we had everybody plugged in and could hear them. We'll start with introductions, and we'll start with our mayor to my left.
Thank you. I'm Vi Lyles.
Johnny Jennings, CMPD.
Marcus Jones, City Manager.
Larkin Eggleston, Committee Chair.
James Mitchell, Vice Chair.
And if we can go with our committee members first, and then other council members that are joining us, and then guests.
Dimple Ashmara, Committee Member.
Renee Johnson, Committee Member.
Victoria Watlington, Committee Member.
Ed Driggs, District 7.
Charles Picard, District 6.
Malcolm, oh, we're going down in order. Newton, District 5. Malcolm, up.
And any guests that we have.
Malcolm Graham, District 2.
And I believe I see, did I see another deputy chief on or some non-council member guests on the feed?
Yes, CMPD.
Angela Charles, City Manager's Office.
All right, I guess that's it, or everybody else is shy. So, I appreciate everybody joining us today. We do have, it looks like, almost the entirety of the City Council joining us for this committee meeting today, but it is still a committee meeting. So just to set the ground rules and expectations, I will call on our committee members first and foremost as we go through these discussions for them to weigh in. Certainly want to hear from our other council members as well, acknowledging that you'll have another opportunity to have this discussion with us on any recommendations we bring forward, but we certainly value your input as we form those recommendations. But bear with me if I give some deference to the committee members first, and also would ask that, given that we don't have the 5 hours that we normally allot ourselves for a full council meeting, that we recognize the fact that this is hopefully a 90-minute to 2-hour committee meeting and not repeat each other or ask questions of staff that we can and maybe should ask offline. So I know I have spoken to one of my committee members who I know feels very up to speed and ready to go, and I think that we agree that action is, there is urgency in our taking action on these issues. I will ask for some patience today. Our next scheduled meeting for this committee was to be in July. I felt like, given all that's going on around us, it was critical that we get together and start the conversations prior to July. So we're here today, the second to last week of June. And today, our expectation is to do more of a level set of everything that's on our plate right now that we're going to be tackling, set some expectations around timelines and outcomes, and make sure that at our next meeting, which will be in July, that we are able to jump right into policy discussion and taking action on potential policy changes. So while not everyone needs this level set, I presume that some do, particularly since we have all the council members joining us that are not on this committee. And so again, would ask for your patience on that front as well. And we'll acknowledge up front, and we might pull this up on the screen later. I'm sure all of you have seen it from Councilmember Watlington. She has tackled the task of mapping this out in a potential timeline for us, which I appreciate, and I think she did a very thorough job of. Obviously, that's something that we'll all take a look at and weigh in on, but just so that Ms. Watlington knows as we start the meeting, in discussions with the manager prior to the meeting, I do think that's a timeline that we can meet and we should aspire to meet. And from his conversation with me, we are looking at taking your timeline and viewing week 1 as the first week of July, which is the beginning of our new fiscal year, as everybody's aware. So we will be operating with that as our the schedule that we'll aspire to, and we'll proceed accordingly. So if we can start off with the city manager giving us an overview and starting to discuss the review of all of the charges that have been sent to this committee, along with the expected outcomes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll start off by saying that I have maybe more paper surrounding me than I've had recently, but that's because there's been a lot of questions and comments coming in over the last few days, so I want to make sure that we capture as many of those as we can. I do want to start off, and the chair used the term level set, and I'd like to use it maybe in a different way, and that is that we are ready for change. We look forward to the dialogue over the course of the next weeks and months. And as in the past, as City Council has had policy recommendations, whether it's around staffing, around pay, around community policing, we have always been open to have that dialogue and provide information to you. One of the things that's important, let's make sure this doesn't do anything. One of the things that's important for us is that as we move forward, we are listening to you. So there's not a PowerPoint presentation today. There's not a series of slides. You may see two. We really want to make sure that we're capturing what's been charged to this committee. And there's at least 3 items that I do want to discuss a little bit to make sure that we are capturing those items. And one was related to budget amendment, one was related to the 8 Can't Wait resolution, and lastly, some of the 3 recommendations that came from Councilmember Graham. So today we have just trying to make sure we have the charge to the committee as well as what are the expected outcomes. You received...
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Mr. Manager, I don't mean to interrupt you, but Mr. Chair, I do have a question.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Wellington.
I just want to make sure I heard and I appreciate what you said before, and I look forward to us looking at my proposal. I just want to make sure that I'm clear. Is that included in the agenda? Is the expectation that by the end of this meeting we will have reviewed and either taken action or have follow-up questions for proposal?
We're certainly happy to field any questions. I think, again, the expectation after my conversation with the manager is that he takes what you've proposed as your timeline and any amendments that anybody might offer to it and view week 1 as the beginning of the fiscal year, which we are just a bit more than a week away from.
Right, but I'm just asking, is that an item on the agenda or do I need to move to have it added?
I guess I need you to clarify for me what, in terms of adoption of that as a timeline?
In terms of review and adoption if there's not outstanding items. I just want to make sure that I'm clear about today we're going to walk away from here with an understanding of a loose proposal or no. Can you scroll down?
Yes, ma'am. That is the hope.
Thank you. All right, thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
And then what we have, over the course of the last few weeks, there have been questions about police unions and civil service boards. So there's a series of frequently asked questions that have been provided to the committee. We'll make sure it's provided to the entire council. And I believe Marie Harris is going to, after this meeting, build a link so that the community can also have answers to questions. And this will be a living document that as more questions come up, we can have those questions answered. And then in terms of next steps, a lot of the conversation has been around action, and that's making sure that there are opportunities for the council to interact with the community, to make sure that the community is interacting with this committee, as well as there are some great tools that have been around in this community for a while that helps building bridges, including Race Matters for Juvenile Justice and some of the other training that's available. So we end up with the next meeting, and this is Ms. Watlington, I think what you were referring to, that included will be your document as well as clarifying the charges for the committee, review of the 8 Can't Wait, talking about when do we talk about police policy and budget allocations, the results of the community survey, some public input sessions, and benchmarks and best practices. But before I turn it back over to the chair, I do want to make sure that today that is not just a discussion about how we move forward. Some of the questions that have come about are crowd management, duty to intervene, use of chemical agents, 8 Can't Wait. Those are some of the topics that Deputy Chief Jennings and the team are ready to discuss today. So I just want to make sure that the council members don't see this as just a planning session. There's opportunities to have some information about why we have certain stances as a part of this initial discussion.
All right.
Fair enough?
Yes, sir.
So with that said, I would just like to go to item number 2, and I just put it out there that there are, I would say, 3 different actions that fall to this committee, well, 2, and we're going to, I think, add 8 Can't Wait because that's obvious. But I do want to make sure in terms of level setting that the council and the committee is in agreement that these are some of the topics that this committee would tackle. So first, we'll call it the Councilmember Graham actions that are related to this committee. So there was the request to provide City Council with a full report on the interaction between CMPD officers and protesters on the evening of June 2nd, 2020 at approximately 9:30, in which chemical munitions were deployed by CMPD officers while protesters were walking on East 4th Street between Tryon Street and College Street. As you are aware, the SBI report is back in, and the city has petitioned the court for those videos to be released. So as that continues, we'll make sure that is not only the committee but also the full council. To the maximum extent allowed by law, request city manager to provide city council with a recurring, preferably on a quarterly basis, report that reflects a review and analysis of relevant data and trends related to complaints of excessive force against CMPD officers. And that is something that will be done. And then finally, for this committee to host public input sessions on policy and procedure regarding a list of items. And I believe that is something that would be discussed again during this meeting as well as future meetings. And then as the budget was adopted, there was what I'll call the Councilmember Winston amendment that I'll read. I am asking a substitute motion to adopt the fiscal year 2021 operating budget and fiscal years 2021 through 2025 capital investment plan, while to directing the administration not to spend money to acquire new or maintain existing stock of chemical agents used for crowd control and crowd dispersal in FY21. We will adopt the budget as presented by the city manager with the caveat that no budgeted funds will be used to purchase chemical agents used for crowd control and crowd dispersal. The following charge or scope of work will at all times be assigned to a standing committee composed of council members and the manager to scrutinize and adjust police spending and policy. The proper place to start this work is the current Community Safety Committee. So that's that charge. And then lastly, in the resolution for 8 Can't Wait, I did provide a report to the council by June 15th, and then in that report, I suggested that this could be further discussed at the Community Safety, Safe Communities Committee. So, Mr. Chair, that is what I would consider those items that are charges to the committee and trying to make sure we hear from you what would be the expected outcomes.
So two things that I know are questions several of our council members and frankly members of the public have about the two things you just mentioned that I'll get you or Chief Jennings as appropriate to address now, if you will. One, and to take them in order, there was mention of the SBI report that is back. Can either of you address the question of the completion date of that report versus the release date of that report, and what the lag was there in making that completed report public, as well as do we have an estimated timeline on when we might get a ruling from a judge on the body camera?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I can answer that, hopefully. That part of the plan when we received the report back was to do a full-fledged presentation, basically with video, from public video that's already out, with maps, things that we can give everyone a full understanding of exactly what's in the report and kind of go right alongside with that. So the situation with the temporary restraining order that everyone's aware of kind of pushed that up for that we wanted to make sure that we put a good understanding of our response, as well as to be able to explain along with the temporary restraining order. So that was part of the reason for the delay. We wanted to make sure we had everyone could get a full understanding of what's in the report and what our stance was on that. So, I'm sorry, you had
the judge, the timing, if we know anything about the judge allowing the release of the body cam.
Yes, I am not sure. That's, we have different, that's totally up to the court, and when they are able to get their full review, what the court will do is review all footage that we provided for them, and then they'll determine what part of that footage needs to be released. And now it could be possible there is a petition, if there is a petition to move that ahead of schedule, but at this point the judges usually go in order of the petitions that are in front of them.
So we don't have any certain expectation around when that might be?
I could not tell you that.
Okay.
No.
And then second, Mr. Manager, on the 8 Can't Wait, obviously anyone who's been following this has seen, and I think we readily admitted up front as a council that we were not starting from scratch here. Several of these were things that CMPD had addressed, others they maybe had components of, but weren't in full alignment with the recommendations from Campaign Zero. I know part of the charge that came from the resolution that council adopted 2 weeks ago, maybe it was for you and your team to do a review of how well our policies do or don't align. How far into that review are you, and have you identified areas where CMPD put out a response, as we're all well aware, that said, hey, we've addressed all 8 of these issues, which I don't necessarily disagree with. However, I do think that it doesn't necessarily mean that the policies we have are exactly the policies we should have, or the policies that are recommended, at least not in their full, strongest and most clear form. Can you speak to whether you have yet been able to identify where there might be gaps that this committee and this council can consider closing to better align ourselves with those policy recommendations?
Sure. What I'd like to do, Marie, could you put up the table of the peer cities? Okay. So what we have been able to do pretty quickly, and I will say to you, there may be some other cities that may disagree with our assessment. So as many caveats that I can put out there in terms of being able to dive deeply into our own policy with the complications with that, it's even more difficult to dive into other cities' policies. So the point is that we have been using these 20 peer cities for the last 2 years when it comes to analysis related to police and fire. So with the peer cities that we have been using, we can tell you that the cities in bold, which is tough to see there, but Atlanta, Austin, Dallas, Houston, Indianapolis, Memphis, and Nashville, have had their mayor, council, or the police department endorse the 8 can't wait policies, okay? So if you saw the entire screen being green, it would mean that these cities that have either adopted the policies or have the policies in play are more or less consistent with the intent, okay? So let's just say that's a little bit of a backdrop to say that other cities are at different levels adopting the 8 can't wait, and they have different patterns in terms of total adoption. So you started off to get Chief Jennings and I in a little bit of battle early on, and I will say that in terms of where we are with our 8 can't wait, I think it's clearly some opportunities to, as you start to compare them with the strict interpretation of the policies, that there are several of these that some would suggest are not consistent with what the intent of 8 can't wait would suggest. But I would leave that up to the police department and Chief Jennings to explain how difficult some of these policies may be to go with word for word. But that's just very, very quickly. We can go as deeply into 8 can't wait as you want. We can have it something that's the first item for the next meeting. We can carve these up and do deep dives 2 at a time. It's whatever the committee wants. But what I will say, and the chief has said this, and I have said it also in my cover letter to you with these 8 can't wait, is that there are opportunities for us to improve. And I will steal a line from the police department. I'm not sure the 8 is enough. And so whatever the city of Charlotte chooses to be the pathway forward, I think it's Charlotte's pathway forward. And I think you had it.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah, it happened in the last month as it relates to policy and
the Direct 8, that there are things that we can still improve on and get better. And as we've mentioned a couple times, we don't feel like 8 is enough. We are currently surveying a community to see what some of their expectations and things that they might want to see within our police department, which I think is very important. Some of the things that that you look at, particularly that we've just implemented or just clarified and made a little bit more concise with our officers, is the duty to intervene. We've always felt that our our policy of neglect of duty was sufficient in that matter. With everything that we've seen throughout the last several months has made us take a look and see to make sure that the wording was proper, and that the expectation of an officer to intervene when there is something so egregious that is shocking, that we would want to make sure that we have policy in place that would, the expectation that they would intervene with that action. So you look at particular actions that across the country that we would expect our officers to intervene with their peers and to go up and take over a situation that they feel that is that egregious. So with that, I think that once we are able to get a lot of the information back from the public on the survey, we already have 1,600 responses, which I think is fantastic. And some of the topics that they are looking at that we just kind of put off the top of the book, top of the trees for it, is a crime prevention, crime fighting, and accountability and transparency are 3 things that are kind of coming back from those surveys that we want to make sure that we include here. So, just a couple of more things as far as what other reforms should CMPD consider incorporating as part of that survey. We're looking at a lot of people are mentioning de-escalation training, additional de-escalation training, early intervention training. I think that's meaning not necessarily the training, but an early intervention system, which an EIS system, which we currently have, but maybe some enhancements on how we use that early intervention system. And also, we're still reviewing the feedback, but I can assure you that more things are going to come out of this survey that we'll be able to implement and marry up to the 8 Can't Wait campaign.
And I apologize if you touched on this quickly and I missed it. I'm trying to air traffic control our questions over here too. But did you mention what Chief Putney had put out recently around how we will change our processes and procedures as it relates to giving an order to disperse when it comes to public gatherings?
I failed to mention that. However, policy, that has already changed, and we're still, matter of fact, we're still, even though we've implemented that policy, it's still looking to improve on that as well. But dispersal orders, as we saw from the June 2nd incident, we are looking at what has changed is the immediacy of the actions of the protesters as it relates to our justification for the dispersal order. So if we have riotous activities in one location and then they move to another location and there's a time lapse in between that, then we have to reestablish that entire reasoning for the dispersal order and the use of any riot control agents as well. So those are things that were put in place immediately. We've actually outlined in our policy, and there's still more to come as related to our policy with crowd management and crowd control.
And then finally, before we get into our list of questions here, if either of you, manager or chief, can speak to, I know that there have been calls from a lot of our advocacy groups in the community and council, frankly, around holster monitors, if either of you can speak to our timeline for implementation on those.
You referring to signal sidearm, the host?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah. So signal sidearm, we are in the process right now of implementing signal sidearm, which basically is if an officer pulls his firearm, their body-worn camera automatically activates, as well as body-worn cameras of anybody any officers in that vicinity. I will verify, but I believe we've already started issuing the signal sidearms, and those are coming in, and we're distributing them out to our officers right now. So.
And do you know now, or can you let us know soon what the full implementation timeline for that is, as far as every officer having that as part of their equipment?
Yes, I'll tell you what, I will look here in my notes here. I may have that for you right now, so okay. I will let you know.
All right.
Mr. Chair, I would like to add to that that was a recommendation that came a few years ago, and we're very appreciative of the recommendation. I don't know if it was Robert Dawkins who had the
Safe Coalition was, and Robert were a big part of that.
Yeah, and a part of the issue was we beta tested this, and there were some problems with it. So now that the testing has gone all the way through, we're very confident in the technology, but some of it had to do with just the beta test and some of the problems with the technology.
Yeah, and if I can add, Mr. Chair, we purchased 1,175 of those units back in February, and those have been scheduled. It was scheduled for a March rollout with COVID-19. That obviously delayed it. So as we start getting those in now, we're beginning to equip officers with that.
Thank you. All right, so again, we're going to start. We've got 6 people queued up here. We're going to start with our committee members, and I will ask again that if your question gets asked, please do not feel compelled to repeat it. We'll start with the Vice Chair, Mr. Mitchell, and then we'll go with Ms. Watlington and Ms. Ajmera in that order.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deputy Chief, let's go back to if we can, the SBI report. And so can you share, because one, has it been concluded? And 2, what is the timeline that this committee and mayor and council will get a chance to see all the findings? What is your timeline?
Yes, my understanding that the SBI report is concluded. I believe we've shared that. Have you all been privy to that already, or have you already seen it? I believe we did share that already. So, is that what you're asking? I'm sorry. That has not.
It has not been shared with this.
Not y'all's announcement. The report itself is public.
Right.
But were you asking about CMPD's, all of the other stuff they were going to put around it for
a presentation?
Yeah.
The CBI. Yeah.
the presentation of the report, yeah, I'll have to get back. I believe that when we pushed that up with what you saw with Deputy Chief Estes, was going to be our response to that, and we weren't planning on doing another presentation in reference to the report, if that's what you're asking.
Yes. And
Okay.
so, okay.
So I'll try to be helpful.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So I think what's happening, Chief, is that two pieces. So there was Chief Estes, and thank you, Chief Estes, for the presentation last Friday. I think the ask is the same thing that the public got. Could the council get that, or this committee, and anything in addition that would be available, knowing that right now the body-worn camera footage has not been approved by the judge? Yes. That's it.
Yeah, so we can absolutely do that, and I would like to do that in conjunction with the release of the body-worn camera footage. So.
But my only hesitation, I think you shared with us, you did not know when we would get that permission.
Yes.
And so I don't want this to be 6, 7, 8 months from now. So I would, Chair, suggest that we do it in two sections we made. One is from Control of Transparency to the CBI, and then secondly, once we get permission from the judge to show the video. And that was my second question again, Chair, my last follow-up. Who made the request, Chief or City Manager, to the judge?
We can hear Mr. Mitchell.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? I'm sorry. The Deputy Chief or City Manager, who made a request to the judge for us to see the video? Was it police attorney or the city attorney?
It's one and the same now, Mr.
Okay.
Mitchell. Everybody reports to Patrick.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Watlington.
I've got a few things. First of all, in regards to thank you for the overview. First of all, for the 8 can't wait. I wholeheartedly agree with the city manager in that regardless of whatever other city is doing, we can choose to be the benchmark here. So I don't want us to get too hung up on what Atlanta or Chicago or anybody else is doing. I think that we need to look at our policies and we need to make adjustments that work for our city. And I do believe if we take a holistic, comprehensive approach, then the 8 can't wait policies will shake out. So I don't want us to be hamstrung by the 8 can't wait policies. I think we need to be methodical and we need to go through our directives. And I know we'll discuss that before this meeting is over in terms of the proposed approach. The question that I have at this point is we talk about policies, and I've heard several changes that have already been made to particular items. I have not seen those, so I want to make sure that we're talking about the same thing when we say policy, because I know we've got directives and then we've got SOPs, and the SOPs are not public. I would like to see, when we talk about transparency, what needs to be true to change this, because I feel that this committee in particular, in order for us to be able to set the tone and direction for our policing, we need to be clear about what these changes are, when they happen, and before they happen. So I would like to understand what, if any, barriers exist so that we are on the leading edge of this policy change rather than hearing about it after it's happened.
So, Ms. Watlington, what I would propose for this committee is that in the past, there have been policies that have come out, and sometimes they may have there may have been a briefing for the Citizens Review Board or things of that nature. If I hear you correctly, basically what you're saying is as these things come out, isn't there a place for this committee to be briefed prior to the general public? I think that's what I'm hearing you say.
Correct, and not just to be brief, but to give input.
Sure.
So if I'm understanding correct, you're talking about standard operating procedures, which are not public information. However, we do often try to provide clarification and summaries of what's in those standard operating procedures. But the reason for that is a lot of the things in there are tactics that the public may not be privy to, and so that's why we have a separate set of documents with our directives and our standard operating procedures.
Thank you for that. And so as we talk about this a little bit later on, as we start to get into the details, that is something that I want to understand how we change, because I appreciate that it may not be something that we want the public, the general public, to be aware of because it may compromise operations. I do think that does not absolve us as council from knowing and understanding and approving what is in the SOPs.
Agreed.
Thank you. That's all for me.
All right, thank you. Ms. Ajmera?
So, Mr. Chairman, some of my questions have already been asked, so I'm gonna just, I just have a couple of more questions that's not been addressed. So, can you go back to the slide where there is a list of cities, peer cities, and the implementation? Yes, thank you. So, as we can see, for an example, Minneapolis, where we have pretty much all green, or except for one or two, that they already had duty to intervene policy, but certainly that was not followed. So I am interested, I think we can work on policies all day, but what are the practices or what is the process currently in place for officers who do not follow policies to hold them accountable, and their records? Are those public records?
You're referring to records as far as officer disciplinary actions?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so no, there are certain things we cannot release as personnel, as part of the officer's personnel records. However, what we do, we have rules of conduct that cover our, to ensure that officers are following policy and our directives. And out of those rule of conducts, it covers disciplinary action, and then at that point, we move forward with hearings for the officers to have their due process as far as that's concerned, is to determine what corrective action might be put in place.
Okay, so are those disciplinary items, are those public record that may not be personal matter? I guess, can citizen go on the website and take a look at it?
You do take a look at the rules of conduct?
Rules of conduct, or even in the instance where officers have had violations in terms of the policies were not followed or far too many complaints.
Yes. We have data that deals specifically with overall complaints. We don't have that attached with a name as far as the officers are concerned, however. But yes, that information is available as far as, I can't tell you if it's on the website or not, but it is available when you do an overview of officer complaints. And I believe that was even in some of the material that was provided for you as well.
Yes, I mean, we got the big binder, but what I'm saying is that can we make that record public? So if someone wants to pull up a report on an officer that looks at disciplinary actions or conduct or complaints, all they have to do is just go to the city website.
Yeah, again, I hope I'm answering your question, that that information, as far as information about complaints on officers, both internally and externally, if I'm not mistaken, that's in the annual report every year, or the internal affairs report. However, again, we don't release information officer specifically about disciplinary action.
And Ms. Ajmera, I think your question has actually brought up a shortfall of our pre-planning for this meeting that we will not repeat for the next meeting, which is we need to have someone from the city attorney's office in these committee meetings, because there will frequently be questions like yours around what we have the legal ability to do or not and share or not. And so I apologize that we did not foresee that need, but we will make sure that going forward we do have someone here to help answer those.
Yes, if we can get a follow-up on that, I think for transparency, we do need to make those records public. I know that we might have it in annual report, but it should be easily accessible for any professionals that have that are state licensed. All the records are public. If they were disciplined by the board, all the records are public. Whether it's CPA, whether it's attorney, whether it's medical professionals, and I think it same goes on for officers. I think that's it goes a long way to create trust with our community. Other question I have is going back to the SBI report. In the report, where the SBI said that CMPD staff advised multiple times there was no body-worn camera footage of the incident on June 2nd around 9:30 p.m. on 4th Street between South College and South Tryon Street. Why do we not have body-worn camera footage for that?
Okay, thank you for that. So we are in the process of outfitting our civil emergency units gear to, it's called a MOLLE, where we are able to mount the body-worn cameras on that. At this time, their body-worn cameras cannot be mounted on the uniforms or the equipment that they wear for riot control. We've already started to implement some of that with our grenadiers and our supervisors. They already have outfitted for that. And as we're getting this equipment in, which has already started to come in, we are able to outfit more of our civil emergency unit officers that have the outfits, the gear to be able to mount the body-worn cameras. Now, we only have a certain amount of those, about 300 coming in, and we need some more, which we will be identifying funding to be able to continue those purchases and to get more of them.
So do we have a timeline around implementing that?
All right, we should have those 300 outfitted within the next month or so. And like I said earlier, we already have put about 50 of those out to certain individuals on our civil emergency unit. And as they come in, which they've already been ordered and on their way, and as they come in, we will be distributing those to our civil emergency unit officers.
Got it. So I hear that in a month it should be fully implemented.
That is a guess on best case scenario if that equipment does come in, and we did have those ordered that they would be here before the RNC. So that's my best guess, is that within the next month or so we should have at least that initial order that we've made come in and distributed out to those officers.
Thank you, Chief. Could we get more firm timeline on that after you have more details?
I can't predict when they will come in, but what I can promise you is that once they are in and distributed, I can certainly give an update then.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, our next three, and then we'll move to the next section of our agenda, are the Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember Winston, Councilmember Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess that last conversation took me by surprise. That's to say, maybe I didn't hear the whole thing, but Chief, can you clarify that our civil, what do you call it, civil order officers?
Civil emergency unit officers, yes.
Civil emergency unit officers, and I recognize some of those officers out there. So, are they also patrol officers?
Yeah, let me clarify. Thank you for asking that, because it does need some clarification. Our civil emergency unit officers are officers. They're taken from patrol in different areas when we need them. They're not full-time officers. They have extra equipment. They're all issued body-worn cameras. However, the equipment that they use during the civil emergency, during any type of deployment, is not conducive to hold the camera mounts on their chest protectors that they have when they wear their gear. So
Okay.
they're unable to wear them.
Got it. So they might come in from their beat in the Metro Division and be told that now you're going to be going downtown, so go in and change your uniform, and that uniform doesn't hold a body camera. Is that right?
That's correct. Every member of our civil emergency unit has a body-worn camera issued. They're just unable to mount them at this time until we get the new equipment fully in and get them distributed.
Okay, that to me is just really surprising because I've been involved with body cameras since CMPD piloted them, even before I was on council. So that's the first time I've heard or understood that our officers are out there without body cameras since we've put them in place. So I think that's an example of something that we need to be a lot more upfront about so that we all understand these things when, there's an assumption that we do. And I think we all kind of felt that officers were out there with body cameras, but thank you for clarifying that. The second thing, I wanted to go back to the chart with the cities for the 8 can't wait. And I think it's just a point to bring up that, and we've all talked about it, you've mentioned it, that we can't put too much weight on this chart because some of these cities, Minneapolis, Seattle, that seem to have checked a lot of the boxes, and Ms. Ajmera said it, they're not doing it. But they also, I think it's in the case of Seattle and Minneapolis, that duty to intervene and de-escalation came out of a Department of Justice consent decree. Those cities are still under consent decree. Some of the other cities may have been under consent decree when they passed when some of those regulations were passed and imposed on them. So I do think it's a point that we've really never brought up in this conversation, that, let's look at the cities that have moved forward on their own to pass these policies. It's a little bit like herding cats, isn't it? That you pick a policy and then just try to get everybody to follow it, when the fact is one city wrote different rules or had those rules applied on them and they got out from under it. So it really, we're wasting our time to focus on the other cities. We've got to focus on Charlotte and looking at those 8 directives, which are good directives. How does our language line up to each one of those? Because it's not fair to say, look at how well Seattle is doing, when the fact is they didn't really want to be under that consent decree, but they were made to. So it's just a comment.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And Mr. Winston, if I may, Committee Member Johnson has a question. I'm going to let her jump ahead, and then you'll be next.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify something, and this might be for Marcus. So Chief Jennings just stated that there's no body cam on the riot gear. Is that correct?
Yes, what he said was that some of the equipment that we use is not currently capable of having the body-worn camera gear, yes.
So what video are we waiting for the court order to release? Because that was our question from council in reviewing the situation from June 2nd, is I thought we were waiting on officer body cam to take a look from different perspectives.
Yes.
So
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
The video that we're waiting for, any video that we are custodians of, requires a court order to be released. That includes helicopter footage and any surveillance footage from our street cameras that we have in our servers.
I think her question is, are there officers that were wearing body-worn cameras out there that night that captured video, or was everybody in this gear that does not support the body-worn camera?
Yeah,
is that right, Ms. Johnson?
I thought we were waiting on body cam. I wasn't aware that the officers on the actual front line weren't wearing it. So my question is it other officers, helicopters, surveillance, or what are we waiting on for a report?
Yeah, so outside the helicopter and surveillance video, The review will also include any bike officers that would have their body worn, because our bike officers are equipped with body worn. And if there's any value of their body worn that's out there that would actually show anything in reference to that incident.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right, Mr. Winston?
Thank you very much. I think my comments will be directed to Mr. Jones. I just want to speak it into the record that this committee's mandate, as the chairman has said, is to be able to scrutinize and adjust the totality of police policy areas and not just 8 of them. But with that said, we also do have a charge that looks at 8 specific policy areas now. And if Marie could bring up the CMPD response to 8 can't wait sheet, I think that's kind of what I'll be referencing here. Yeah, that sheet right there. I do agree with the areas. I say areas of policy with intent. If you look at some of the pre-read material, when you get to the bottom of a CMPD policy, it references other policies that are germane to that specific policy. It references other city ordinances that might affect that policy, and of course, state laws under which those policies are mandated. And my whole point is that to change behavior and culture, we will have to address the several policy areas at once to get the type of behavior and cultural change that I think we and our citizens want to see. For example, in the duty to intervene, that idea, while it might be one point on that sheet, it potentially affects policies related to detainment and arrest of suspects, administrative policies, chain of command, and the ability to adjust concurrent policies if trends and repeated behavior are observed. So my suggestion is that we retire the moniker of 8 can't wait. We should not reference that anymore. That was a campaign, an outside campaign. We have said that we are dealing with these 8 specific policy areas. Now we need the manager to bucket the entire policy areas into aggregated policy groups that we, as a manager and council, can methodically scrutinize and adjust said policies in their totality. So if you bring up that 8 can't wait sheet again, while some of the dates of adoption, per se, might have started a long time ago, we know that the way it is implemented and the way it is practiced in CMPD is not acceptable to our citizens right now. So that is going to be the job of this committee and this work, and I think that is what I'm expecting the manager, along with me and my colleagues, to work on, to figure out how do we methodically go through the aggregate policy areas and bring actionable items for change.
To your point, Mr. Winston, I agree, and as I said at the beginning, I acknowledge that CMPD has done something in their policies to address each of these topics, but that doesn't necessarily mean we are where we should be on our policies as it relates to that topic. And I think we as elected officials, to your point, can't be satisfied until the policy we do have and the policy we should have are one and the same.
I'd like to, if Mr. Jones, if there's any clarification that needs to be made.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Winston. I do agree with you. That's part of why on the agenda I did item 2, because what I don't want us to do is get you frustrated with having a bunch of presentations or carving things up a particular way and the committee and the council saying, where's the action? So what's important for me today and the team is to address the question that you just asked. How do we go about tackling the work?
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. Mr. Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would agree with my colleagues that we shouldn't get hung up on what other cities are doing. We need to be responsive to our needs here in the city of Charlotte. I also agree with Councilmember Winston that we need to move beyond the moniker of 8 can't wait, look at much broader, comprehensive policy approach here. I think that it's all about the language, and maybe that's the lawyer or the attorney in me, but bear in mind, what we have. So the slide that was up a moment ago that showed the dates off to the right, bear in mind that with the exception of the more recently duty to intervene adoption, these dates are before Jonathan Farrell, before Keith Lamont Scott, before Curtis Franklin, a number of other folks that I think all emblazoned in our memories at this point, and certainly I think despite the implementation of what exists today, there is a lot of discord and disagreement in the community, and arguably rightfully so. When I look at the information provided to us, the policy that the policy language, there are terms such as egregious that are used. Language like where time, distance, communication, and circumstances permit, reasonably available. This is very broad language that can be interpreted in a number of different ways, whatever outcome might be desired. And I think that it can be reined in a bit so that we are being more responsive to the needs of the community and making sure that our desired intent is achieved. I wanted to ask Deputy Chief about the recent SBI report. We have now seen that report, and I was wondering, and this touches on issues of crowd management, this touches on issues of the use of chemical agents and other objects to disperse crowds. I was wondering, does that report, does it constitute the conclusion of the CMPD internal investigation?
No, it does not. The CMPD internal investigation is ongoing, and that's part of, we will have an internal investigation as far as whether policy and procedures were followed, and that'll be a full hearing that will take place internally.
Do we have any idea of when the CMPD investigation will be completed?
I know that they've conducted interviews of individuals, of the officers on the scene. I'm not sure how many citizens they've conducted interviews that were out on the scene, but I can try to get you a timeline on that and see where we are in that process and when that hearing would be scheduled.
And the reason why I ask, and I appreciate that, I would like that information. The reason why I ask is that, it's my hope that pending the outcome of that investigation, our hands or CMPD's hands aren't tied in ways that they can improve their tactics pertaining to crowd management, the procedure and tactics, and any use, of objects such as chemical agents or flashbangs. I really appreciate Deputy Chief Jennings the evaluation of the orders to disperse and the fact that now it's policy that the dispersal orders and any sort of aggressiveness displayed towards officers coincide in time and space immediately. But I think that's very, I think, overdue. Having said that, something that was striking to me in the SBI report was a statement that the protesters on June 2nd had two avenues to escape, but at the same time, acknowledgement that one of those avenues, the intersection at College and 4th, that there had been flashbangs and tear gas placed in that intersection. It's always been my understanding that the objects and then of course the other intersection blocked by officers, but it's always been my understanding that those objects were meant for dispersal purposes, meant to push people away from them, and the idea that they would first in the exact area where we hope to see folks escape seems counterintuitive to me. It seems as though it's really blocking those folks in, and to the extent that whether intentional or unintentional was the case, I think that that's a very, very important procedure that needs to be evaluated. And my hope is that waiting for the SBI report to be, or I'm sorry, for the internal investigation to be completed doesn't prevent our department from looking at that and reevaluating the use of that type of a tactic, or putting measures in place to prevent a tactic or procedure like that from happening again, whether intentionally making sure, right, if at all possible it doesn't happen. We know that protests are going to continue, and we need to do everything we can pending any potential investigation to ensure that peaceful protests can continue safely. I want to ask you also, Deputy Chief Jennings, some additional questions here. That I understand and I appreciate our officers, the job they do. I do think it's indispensable. At the same time, I was wondering, it's a tough job, and I can only imagine, being placed in dangerous situations on a regular basis, how that could really wear you down. And I was wondering, how often do our officers go through mental health evaluations? How often do they have? So how often, and do they have those resources also readily available to them outside of any type of requirement for that type of evaluation?
Yes, absolutely. And let me back up to one of your comments about the deployment of the riot control agents. And to answer one of your questions is, yes, we've already changed the policy that deals with deployment of riot control agents from multiple angles of a protest group. So in this case, you're referring to we had officers in front of them with riot control agents, and then you saw riot control agents coming in from behind them as well. That policy change will prohibit that kind of activity within part of our plans for disbursement as well. So we have addressed that, and something that we took very seriously, and wanted to make sure that even though it is an approved method of disbursement, we understood what it does, aesthetically what it looks, as well as to be able to force some group to have to go into exposure of those agents in order to disperse was a concern that we had as well. So, I'm sorry.
I appreciate that, and I really appreciate you mentioning that as well. I wasn't aware of that. And so I think that that absolutely asking folks to disperse through agents meant for dispersal, objects meant for dispersal, just seems a bit counterintuitive to me. Also, I think given the fact that the council has withdrawn funding for chemical agents, maybe also looking at whether existing stockpiles should be used, I think is something to consider as well. In as much as, so going forward to the question I mentioned a moment ago about access to psychological or mental help if and when needed, or even required, is that required on a regular basis beyond, say, entry level, coming in after the academy? If so, how often? And then also, is it available outside of any requirement?
Yes, it is. It's not required. Once you're out of the academy and you're out of the training session, it's not required. However, CMPD is fortunate to have a clinical psychiatrist that's actually works with us and works out of our facilities. Officers have full access to him. There are some incidents that an officer may be involved in that might be traumatic, that we do require an assessment and for the meeting with our clinical psychologist. We also have employee assistance program, which is common to the city, as well as our peer support program with our officers who are trained, and they're not counselors. However, they are available to other officers to be able to speak with. And, you know, we do try to make sure that the mental health and mental well-being of our officers is on the forefront. There's also some things that we're looking at that I just left a meeting with my deputy chiefs earlier, that we're going to look at other ways for officer wellness and to look at other ways to ensure their mental health is strong as they take on this job. So any traumatic events, we are intentional about trying to ensure that they're ready and able to carry out their duties within the police department.
And Mr. Newton, I think you make a good point. I also think, regardless of the outcome of any investigation, be it internal, SBI, or otherwise, I hope our focus will continue to be not so much about, it might well be that current policies were followed in what happened that evening, and I think it's incumbent on us as elected officials to determine if those should be our policies or if our policies should change, and they might well need to change, and I think that's on us. I would also encourage my colleagues who've made mention of, you know, not just focusing on 8 Can't Wait. I don't think we're just focusing on anything, and as I've heard many of us say, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. Doing one of these initiatives or one of these focus areas does not preclude us from doing a lot of others, and frankly, we're going to have a lot of irons in the fire at one time as we go through this work. So no one's hung up on any one thing, nor will it prevent us from doing others. So I've got Mr. Bakari, and then I'd like to go back to the manager to advance the agenda.
A couple more things,
Let's practice brevity as best possible.
You got it. So 1033 program, are we involved in the 1033 program at all, Deputy Chief Jennings?
No, we're not. We have not been for several years.
Okay, great. SBI review, is there anything that would prevent, in certain instances, like say an officer-related shooting fatality, anything preventing automatic? I mean, I think right now SBI review is required only when it's requested by the chief. Is there anything that would prevent policy actually requiring it in instances of a fatality or even excessive force?
That is already a requirement when there's an officer-involved shooting or any incident where an officer in custody death or something similar. SBI is the investigating agency.
Any requirement for instances of potential excessive force? Or is it just in fatality situations?
Fatality, I would imagine any serious injury, we could request an SBI investigation. However, we are the investigating agency for excessive use of force.
Yeah, and so I guess my question is more pertaining to it being a trigger, right? Something that's automatic rather than the request.
Yes.
But okay, next question. So this is my final question. Crisis intervention, the CRCBT program. Where does that stand? Are we in the process of expanding that?
You mentioned two separate things: CPCRT or crisis intervention. They're two separate things.
So CPCRT.
Yes, CPCRT has been ongoing, and as a matter of fact, I do have. So our CPCRT was something that is Community Policing Crisis Response Team, and I'll give you like just the two. It started in April of 2018. And by the end of that year, they were over 2,000 calls for service that they were involved in and 900 referrals. So they are very busy. It's something that I feel like was a great use of resources, and that work and actions will continue.
And I couldn't agree more with that. I would ask that when we look at this more comprehensive review of our policy, that we look at the availability, maybe the requirements of mental evaluations for our officers, given the stressors that they are continually put under, and then at the same time too that we look at automatic reviews, or maybe expanding automatic review of instances to the SBI, so automatic review of cases of excessive force, potentially even more to the SBI. I do want to thank you, Deputy Chief Jennings, for your answers, for you being here, your hard work, and just also want to thank our officers too. Once again, indispensable job that they engage in. It is a dangerous job, but it's important, and I want to thank them. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, if I can follow up with one quick thing.
Sure.
I think we need to also just kind of be wary of, or that there's a difference between a review and an investigation. So an SBI review will be to come in and review, but an investigation, they would take over that and determine if there's any type of legal or illegal activity that's taken place for presentation to the district attorney.
And no one has to thank Chief. He has to be here. We're glad he's here, but he has to be here. Mr. Bakari, wrap it up for us on this section.
Sure, thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to start with an observation, and then I'll go into a question. And I'll actually start with the SBI report. If we're kind of looking back and dissecting things as we have, it exactly reinforced what we have heard in multiple occasions from the day after to the full week after from the city manager, from the police chief, and from the city attorney that video that we all saw that went viral was damning, it was frustrating, it was angering to watch. However, what they all said to us was, there is more to the story when you dig a little deeper, and you will see that when the SBI report review comes back. You will see that further when we are able to show you video. And I would say that with the SBI report coming out the other day, which it really hasn't gotten a lot of press and buzz as much as our initial responses in those press conferences did, it said exactly what we were told. It backed up exactly what we were told. There was no Catalan, is essentially what that said in their actions there. And there were multiple dispersion notices given with the LRAD device. So I think what we are left with here is exactly what some of us said that we might be left with at this point, a community that either doesn't care or doesn't trust in an independent investigation that review that we called for. Not we, like the city or the mayor or the council or the manager. The chief and CMPD asked for that to occur because they knew it would be important for an external review to occur. So I just want to make sure, because that has really flown under the radar after really morale took a beating in how some responded after that event. I think it's important with as much gusto and as much of a floodlight that we look on those SBI report results and say, thank you, police officers, for doing exactly what we instructed you to do in our policy and exactly what we spent countless weeks in this very committee since 2016 going over and over and ensuring you trained. Now, the only advice I might throw out, if this is going to be productive, and this is coming from, I spent a career in the private sector designing policy, understanding what types of policy is public-facing, what is highly confidential, what kind of information can be shared, and how they're constructed well. I have the feeling, if we keep going down this path, Mr. Chair and Mr. Manager, that it reminds me of when my wife says, can you go check out my car, something's wrong, and I look in the engine, I'm like, yes, it's a 2019 engine. I have no idea what's even in there. Right now, we're peppering an us versus them. Here's a bunch of questions for the police officers. How does this happen? We don't have the beginning of understanding of elements in the deeper levels of these policy. There are some things we need to get deeper on, but there are some things that would be better if we didn't do an us versus them. I bet you, in fact, here's my final question. Chief Jennings, Estes, anyone who's on, if we were to ask you the question in the next one of these meetings, why don't you come back to us and surround this table as a team and say, you've done a lot, the policies, you enacted them the way that we expected you to. What could change? What would you have to figure out for us to get rid of tear gas? What would you have to figure out, or do you need to purchase to make sure every single uniform, including riot gear, has cameras on it all the time? What do you need to separate the difference between policy violations that are a felony and a misdemeanor? What tells us when an officer does something like falsifying time cards that lets us know there might be an ethical problem there versus little things that people just get dinged on in such a highly scrutinized space? So my question as I end here is, Chief, soon-to-be Chief and Deputy Chief, what would you do if asked that question to participate not in answering firing line questions, but to participate in actually making real meaningful change in policy?
Thank you for that question, council member. I think that, and I will let Deputy Chief Estes chime in as well, but I think we've said it all along that we are always willing to, we're an improving agency. We always are willing and looking to improve, not just off of things that we might look at, whether they're mistakes or things that we've done right. We want to make sure that we are constantly getting better. And what I see is a collaboration that with this committee, with the community, the public, it's a teamwork type of atmosphere at this point. I think that I'm going to be able to get our officers and our staff and employees on board that things are going to look differently. But they can't be held, I think you mentioned at one of the council meetings, that can't be something that's done to us. It has to be something that's done with us. And I think that's very important because it is true, regardless of how you feel, that it's very difficult to be in a situation to where that, I don't want to say outside looking in or us against them, but there is some value in the experience that you have within the agency. We have excellent talent within CMPD, probably some of the best in the country, that is more than capable of ensuring that we're getting better every day. With that, I'll let Deputy Chief Estes chime in if he wants to at this point.
Sure. I'd like to echo a couple of things that Deputy Chief Jennings just said, or maybe in a slightly different way. If it is the council's supposition that this is a defensive, that we are in a defensive us versus them mentality, I just want to assure you that it's not. Before any of the questions were posed today, we as a body, collective group of people who've given their adult lives to the nobility of what we're trying to do and help people, we go through round robin question and answers in ways that we might improve so as to improve our standing in the community, regardless of what questions may be asked here. So in that vein, if we were to say, hey, chiefs, what do you think you could do about this part, that part, the other thing? With a lifetime of experience, I assure you we could come back with relevant, timely, and efficient policy changes that we can make with you in collaboration, in conjunction with what the community expects and wants, and in a way that would be accepting to the troops in the field to make sure that they, or the officers in the field, to make sure they understood what the policies were, the direction that we wanted to head. So I am all for being able to go back, work with the chief and my peers to say, here's some policy changes that we think need to be made in an offensive mode, if I can say that. Lastly, I hope you were able to see that with the 8 things that were put before us, where we have differing opinions on how much that we abide by those or not, and at what times. We ourselves said, well, this 8's good, but it's just a start. We identified things that we would like to do outside this 8, where we could have very well just said, well, here's the 8 and that's it. No, we don't believe that that these 8 go far enough. So to the council member's point, I believe, for me, that's the much more effective way to go than to run off on errands trying to answer questions about things that may or may not be pertinent to what you're really trying to achieve. Thank you.
I think as we have these policy discussions, for us to try to create changes in our policies that govern our police department without their input would be irresponsible. And at the same time, I hope both the chiefs understand that I think this council, a majority of this council, would believe that only relying on the perspectives of our police officers as we craft these policies would also be irresponsible. So I think it's both, and we will certainly do this in partnership with you, but not solely with the department. And I think that's the only fair way to go about it. I've got Committee Member Ajmer and Council Member Graham. I'd ask you to, if you can, both keep your questions to 1 minute because we've got more material to cover and we are almost 90 minutes in now.
I can wait till later.
Thank you. Mr. Graham?
It's not a question, it's just a comment, and I think Bakari is right on point on the number of issues, but I just want to leave this part in comment that just because, and I'm talking about the SBI report, just because no policy violations happened doesn't mean that mistakes were not made that night. And that's, we're having this conversation. Thank you.
And I think we can only hold our officers accountable for what we view as mistakes if we have codified our expectations for them and they have violated them. So I think a lot of that blame falls on us as the elected officials. If we've not gotten the policy right, we have to shoulder a lot of that blame if we think mistakes were made, particularly if they fell within the policies that we have set. So
Here.
we've got a lot of work to do. Mr. Jones?
Or they can be tactical in nature as well, which is not a policy, it's a mistake.
Well, we will all work together to make sure that those mistakes are addressed. Mr. Jones?
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. And even though we're on 90 minutes into this, I really think we're in a very good place. I hope the perception from the community and from the council is that we really want to work together as a team and really get some things done, short, medium, long term. I will say that I agree with what's been said in terms of what's good for another city may not be good for Charlotte, and what's a part of what we should be working on is what we can do here in Charlotte. And so, Mr. Chair, I think if you would give me a little bit of grace, I like what Council Member Watlington put on the table in terms of, and I'll just say, I work with Councilmember Watlington, and I appreciate her engineering mind, and she has done something that creates a process that makes a lot of sense, that has different items that are to be reviewed and then followed up and then have a council discussion. So I won't read her document, but I do believe if this is a skeleton that the committee could be fine with, I think it's a great way to start. So, Mr. Chair, would you like for her to discuss it?
Yeah, absolutely, Ms. Watlington. If you will give an overview of the thought process behind your timeline here, and I would ask, in lieu of us trying to take feedback on the fly on this, as maybe not everyone's had a chance to read it, though I do appreciate you sending it out to everybody in advance, if we can make sure everybody's got that in their email, has a chance to read it and chew on it, and not trying to do this as they take their first look at it, if we could solicit feedback from committee members, but also other council members on Ms. Watlington's proposed timeline here via email to the committee and the manager, I think that would be the best course of action. But Ms. Watlington, if you'll give us an overview. Yes, sir, Mr. Winston?
I just have a question in regards to procedure. Would it be proper if we utilize the chat function at all to put out questions so that we're all able to see, and maybe those can be displayed in the public record later, so we are able to interact with each other, still given the time constraints that we have?
The WebEx chat function?
Yes, sir.
Is that, we'll enable that now.
And just
Legally, can we do this?
Well, if we do it, then if we do this, then I will have to be able to pull it for public record.
Yeah, the chat that we can enable now, I believe, would be just an internal chat, but then it would have to become part of the public record. I actually think Mr. Winston's asking that it be part of the public record.
Well, I'm asking if that is something that might help facilitate this conversation, which I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions to have that people are going to want to ask in real time, or at least put it in the
I'm
table,
comfortable with that if we are, from a legal perspective, that can be something that we can gather. I don't know that they'll be able to be addressed in real time, but they can be gathered and be the starting point for the discussions after the meeting. And then obviously anything that's put into that chat will be made public.
Okay.
We're getting a legal ruling on that quickly.
And
It's taken us three months to learn how to do the mute, unmute, so I think it's time for us to learn a new skill. Chat seems perfect.
Well, Mr. Bakari, if you don't mind pulling out your whiteboard, maybe you can go over that process with us. All right, so Mr. Jones is getting a legal ruling real quick on how that does or does not align with our open meetings rules and laws. And then, Ms. Watlington, I'll ask you to pause for 60 seconds so that Mr. Jones is privy to your comments
Let me see if I can copy this.
regarding your timeline.
Sure. And just, Mr. Chairman, just so you know, everyone has this document and all the other documents in their email as of the start of the meeting.
So if anybody didn't catch that, everybody should have this and all other relevant documents in their email from right before the start of this meeting. If you'd like to reference this on your own computer, if you're having trouble seeing it on the screen. And again, we'll make sure we have someone from the city attorney's office here for our next meeting to expedite these questions. Mr. Jones, what's the word? He does not recommend it. All right. We've gotten a legal opinion that is not a recommended course of action, so what I'll ask is what I'd said initially, though I appreciate the idea. I will just ask for feedback via email that is amongst the committee, including the city manager, and we'll compile that and share it with the committee and the council. So, Ms. Watlington, take it away.
Sure. So a couple of things. Firstly, just to set the stage, my proposal is as follows. I'm proposing a 12-member task force for a period of 12 weeks comprised of the 5 council members that sit on the safety committee with voting rights, with 7 additional advisory members from the community outlined as follows. 1 community advocate on police reform, 1 FOP leadership designee, 1 civil service board member, preferably the chair or vice chair, 1 citizens review board chair or vice chair, 1 CMPD ex-com retiree with policy writing experience. When I say ex-com, I mean at least chief level. And then 2 additional mayoral appointees at the discretion of the mayor. And I propose that we follow the same frequency that we followed for the task force, which is weekly. As we get through the bulk of this would not take the place of ongoing review and ongoing safety committee scope to review and have oversight over policing. But for the bulk of this work, this is what I'm proposing. You can see here on the screen, 12 weeks laid out, and each week would constitute essentially a policy review. Councilmember Winston mentioned earlier looking at all of the directives that are associated with the ones that we pulled out initially for 8 Can't Wait, and that's what I've made an attempt to do initially, is to go and bucket the policy in buckets that relate to one another, and so you can see how they have been parsed out by week. And then the following week, then after the policy is we receive a policy overview. That'll then allow us time to dig deeper into the policies, formulate our questions, so that the following week then we will be able to see a policy follow-up report. And then we as the council, with the advisement of our additional task force members, be able to set a directive or direction towards how we want the policy to change. We would then follow that each week until we got through the pertinent policies. And you can see here that I pulled out about 25, and I chose these based on my comprehensive review of the directives. But if there are other ones that you do not see here, certainly provide the feedback. But I try to choose the ones that are pertinent to not only large events, but also day-to-day operations based on the feedback we've been getting from the community. Next, you'll see here, in addition to the actual policy reviews, I'd like us to discuss discuss external and internal transparency. So those are some of the follow-up items that you've seen from Civil Service Board, Civil Service Board and Citizens Review Board, as well as some of the feedback from a lot of our police reform advocates in terms of reporting and data collection, things of that nature. We need to do a deep dive on that piece and talk about what we are able to provide to the public and how we make sure that we're transparent with the pertinent data without compromising our operations. I think Councilmember Bakari spoke to that a little earlier. Next, you'll see an overview in week 8 of community engagement programs and outcomes, because one of the things that our constituents have been very adamant about is that they want the priority for our taxpayer dollars to be on social programs. There are certainly several, and I know that everybody that got the background information and anybody that's familiar with our police department knows that there's a lot of programs that are done in community engagement, whether it's building the pipeline for future police officers and law enforcement officers, or it's youth diversion programs or neighborhood engagement. And so what I'd like us to do then is take a look at those programs and consider what the outcomes currently are. And do we need to beef up those programs? Are they delivering against the intent? Should they be housed within CMPD, or what is the overall value in those programs, and how do we make sure that we are delivering against the intent? Following that, after we have an understanding of our policies, we have an understanding of our data flow, and we have an understanding of our community engagement and our social programs, then I think we're in a position to review the budget and to adjust it accordingly for our priorities. So you'll see that in the later weeks. And then finally, week 11 and 12, that will be the time that we are able to review the draft revisions from staff based on our direction in the previous weeks, hopefully to then be able to close out with some recommendations to move out of committee to the full council. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Watlington, I appreciate your process-oriented way of thinking and your thoroughness, and I intend, if there's an assistant city manager position open in the next 2 years, to nominate you for it.
I couldn't have.
I'm not sure if you can hold both roles, but you're no doubt capable. Chief?
Yeah, just for my clarification, my understanding is that this subcommittee would bring in recommendations for policy change. Is that correct?
So what we would do is, from a direction standpoint, this committee would offer up, these are the things that we know we want in terms of outcomes. So these are the areas within the policy that we would like staff to return with updated language that would deliver the outcome. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and then it would come to full committee to have discussion and to enact?
So I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. When you say subcommittee, are you talking about this extended membership, the 12 individuals?
Yeah, you had mentioned a subcommittee with a group that would review the policy and have voting authority on the policy. Is that, I might have misheard you, but if you can clarify, that'd be great.
Sure. So what I'm talking about is our existing safety committee, the 5 council members that have voting authority, yes. And then in an advisory role, then the task force would be made up of 7 additional members. I think it's very important that we as elected officials who've been elected to represent the people, that we hold that authority and that accountability to set the policy direction. But I think it was Councilmember Graham's point earlier, we can't, or Councilmember Epson, we cannot do that in a bubble. It would be irresponsible for either one of us to try to do it without the input of the community, but also without the input of the subject matter experts. So the idea would be then that the 12 members of the task force would receive the policy overview. We would hear from the members that are serving in advisory capacity, and then we, as the 5 members of the existing safety committee, would provide the direction to staff as to what direction we want to go to for policy, and then we, the 5, would then vote for adoption to move forward to the full council. Does that make sense?
Yes, so I just maybe want to make sure where the city manager and also police attorneys and where does that play a role in those recommendations or those before we change policy as well. So it might just be me not understanding, but I wanted to make sure I had a full grip on what you were proposing.
If I was just checking in there, I think what would be...
Mr. Bakari, if I can get you to raise your hand, Donata's taking a list there, unless...
Okay.
Sure. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. If
Ms.
I may
Wallington,
respond.
did you want to respond to that real quick?
Absolutely. Chief, me myself, I'm open to conversation. Whatever the normal process is for that to make sure that we're covered from the attorney and city manager, certainly welcome that. I'm not looking to work outside of that process. So where does that lay in? I'm all ears.
If I can get the mayor real quick.
I actually want to thank Councilmember Watlington for outlining this, and I think that it's a good idea. And Chief, I think what we're talking about may need a few tweaks to make sure you have the right people in the room as the discussions are going on. But you'll have to have tremendous support from your team and the city attorney as the group is meeting. I'd like to suggest one thing, Ms. Watlington, and it may make it week 13. But one of the things that I've been thinking about throughout this, while we're having all of this work done, when we had task forces before, they're really focused on some things that probably have specific special interests. So small businesses, you had the businesses, and housing, we have our housing advocates. On something like policing, the entire community is engaged and a part of it. So I'd like to figure out some way that we would actually have a outlined and adopted way to reach everyone in the community, whether it's surveys, focus groups, however we need to do it. I don't think it's appropriate to have like big public meetings because people want to be heard, and sometimes people don't want to speak when everybody else is talking. I know that's unusual for us, but anyway. But what I would like to say is that it needs to be some way that every segment, and I think your representation is good for the task force, but how could we get, let me ask you, what do you think about getting out to the community at large?
Sure, and I love that you mentioned that because you're absolutely right. My thought to that would be that it would be very specific to the particular week that we're in. That way, I know that we've already got surveys going right now, but if there was a way that through our comms team, we could allow folks to weigh in on those particular policies. They're already public information, but if there was a way that we could go through our housing and neighborhood services liaisons and our neighborhood organization contact list, so that folks can have access to that survey. That's what I'm thinking, but I'm open to.
Yeah, I think we all have. I agree with you. We all have the same goal. I'd like to give it some thought. Working with our the Federico group, how's the best way to talk to people that really believe across that's a wide community segment? Maybe we could just spend some time on that. It may be at different intervals, but I think that's where I would try to look for. Just beefing up that part so that nobody gets surprised at week 12 what we're trying to do. Our goal is to get them always engaged early.
Yep, totally
Thank
agree.
you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Bakari got confused and thought this was an episode of the podcast, but Mr. Bakari, this is your turn to speak now.
Don't let the power get to yourself there, co-host. No, listen, honestly, I think, Victoria, once again, your program and project management mind is well aligned for how I think something like this could work. I think there's one thing that I might add for consideration that I think is very, very important. We are on very dangerous ground right now in how the board, if you compare this to the private sector in some ways, how the board in a strong manager form of government gets in and micromanages. If we start getting in there on personnel issues or defining policy for police officers from the board level, that is really unprecedented at that granular level. However, I think we all agree we're in unprecedented times. So I think as I look at that programming process, at the end of the day, though, this is our recommendation to the manager, right? So the manager needs to either implement what he's recommended. Maybe there's some stands he takes at the end of this and says, I'm going to do all that, I'm not going to do that. And at the end of the day, that is our mechanism into the personnel, into the policy issues as the CEO of this company. So I think if we cut the manager out and say our vote is essentially it, Mr. Manager, take that away, that is not the form of government we're in. I think we need to hand that to him, and then he becomes the last point of, I've heard the deep recommendations of all this, and this is the route I'm going to go. This manager in the last 3 years I've worked with him has very rarely stood up and said, I'm not going to do that, what I'm hearing right now. I think we can trust in that. But at the end of the day, when a board starts jumping over a CEO and micromanaging, that just means that they've lost confidence in him and they're about to get rid of him in transition. I don't think that's where we are. So I just recommend that being the end, where it's we hand our recommendations to the manager and then the manager takes it from there and decides what he's going to do. And if he doesn't do what the will of the council is, well, he'll have to face that challenge again down the road. But that's really more aligned to the form of government we sit in today.
Point well
That's
made,
fair.
Mr. Picard. Yes, Ms. Wallington?
I was going to say that's fair. The reason I included it here is because I was thinking that in order for it to be the will of the council, it needed to come out of committee and be voted on by the full council. But if that's not the direction that we have to take for it to be official direction, if you will, then I'm okay with that too.
Yeah, I don't think the point that either of y'all is making is necessarily mutually exclusive of the other. And yes, Ms. Ajmer, I've got you up next.
Oh, thank you. So I hear what Mr. Bukhari is saying and what Ms. Watlington laid out here. I think this is a very good start where we have very detailed sort of objectives for each week and sort of milestones for each week to get to the week 12 decisions at the end. As I agree with this approach. I think. And this is not something we are doing without the city manager, because the city manager earlier mentioned that he agrees with this overall plan that's been laid out here. So I want to hear from city manager, how do you feel about this process? And do you feel that you will have, or you would have an opportunity to provide input throughout this process?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Councilmember Ashmira. Unlike any other committee, I am staffing this one. So I will be at every meeting. You'll hear my voice. You'll understand my rationale, my reasoning. So I don't see this at all as something being, I guess, put together and then dumped on my step. I will be in this all the way through.
So with that, I don't see a reason for us to have another step of recommendations, because as city manager said, he's going to be at every single one of this meeting. He's going to have staff. He's going to, we need to have legal experts in the room. So I think the process as is, it's good. I do have a question for Ms. Watlington. By the way, excellent job, Victoria. So the policies that you have laid out here, I see that there are times we might be on one policy where we might have to look at another policy for us to really understand comprehensively. So I just want to make sure that we are not limited to only these policies or policy overview. We might have to incorporate additional policies as we are moving along the process. So just the flexibility would be important.
Yeah, totally agree. I was trying to cut them up so that we'd have we'd have manageable components, but you're absolutely right. There are places where there is a policy that's referenced that we may not have gotten to yet. So yeah, definitely we've got to maintain the flexibility to get the output we desire.
Right, and I was looking at the slide. I see that some of the earlier question I had have already been included here in the policy. For an example, rules of conduct, discipline, philosophy. So overall, I think it's pretty comprehensive, and I look forward to moving along this process and really having a milestone at every single, at every week. One last question. So I know with this advisory committee we are going to have, I just want to make sure they are non-voting members, and the council members from the safety committee are the only voting members?
Yes, that's my proposal. Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. I'm on board, and I appreciate the work that you have put into this process.
Thank you, Ms. Ajmera. And I think the point Mr. Bakari, what I took away from Mr. Bakari's point was just from a technical standpoint, there are a lot of things that the council does not just directly do, but we direct the manager to do, and I think that is the proper process. If he disagrees with what our directive is, I think we can take him to task for that, but unless we intend to change the entire way that our government operates, I do think it is up to us to hand it to him, tell him it's our expectation of him, and then hold him accountable for his ability to implement our expectation.
But what was I just want to make I want to make sure we're not confusing.
And put your mask on.
I don't know what you were proposing was different. We've always operated that way. So what Councilman Bakari was saying.
Yeah, I think we're on the same. I'm just making sure we're all on the same page with the.
But I think her framework is that, and he reiterated that he will be here. He will be able to meet, have input. And so I don't understand the clarification and then the comment, because I think Ms. Wallington was clearly saying we are the legislative body, but we're going to have our city manager here and staff here. We're not doing anything out of the boundaries. So,
I think there were some people that seemed to think our vote would then directly change the policy, as opposed to our vote would be to recommend a change in policy to the manager, which he would implement. And I think it's maybe a small difference, but I think it's a material difference in terms of how a council manager form of government works, that we make recommendations to the manager, which he implements. If he does not do what we expect of him to do, then we hold him accountable through his job as his bosses. This council, unless I've misunderstood.
I think that line is pretty clear as well. So what I think that Larkin is right. It's a recommendation for him to implement, and then he can come back and tell us how he's implemented or what has changed. But I also believe that because a number of these things are working procedures involving personnel, that he's got to have some ability to, or not, he has the responsibility for dealing with it. And so I think that line, it's a nuance. Yes, council adopts, gives it to the manager, and then some of this maybe it's just done, but some of it is, if it's personnel, I just don't know what the outcomes are to make sure we're doing it right.
And if it's not done and we're not satisfied with his implementation of it, then we hold him accountable. Mr. Jones?
Yeah, so I just want to reiterate what Mr. Mitchell said. I don't see where this is different than anything we've done in the past, and I think we're actually putting more on it than it needs to be put on.
Thank you.
I just want to make sure, I think we were all mostly on the same page there, just saying it in different ways, and I didn't want us to leave with there being any confusion. I've got Councilmember Winston up next with a question or comment.
I will say to Mr. Bakari, we are doing something different. We are doing things differently here now. We are taking a bit more of a micromanaging approach to one of our city departments using the form of the council manager government. So we are doing something different. I would agree with Mr. Eggleston that Ms. Watlington put great work, and I think she's done some of Mr. Jones's work. However, I think it's a good start, and not all should be adopted. The first thing is that we should not have another task force. We understand that Safe Communities Committee deals with has other charges that are not specific to police budgetary and operational policy implementation and scrutinization. For instance, they deal with things like code enforcement, and so there needs to be a space where that work gets done, but this work also does get done. The committee looks like the room looks like today. 12 members, the mayor and council working with the manager to go through these things. If CMPD needs, as they have a seat at the table as well, if they need their lawyers, members of FOP, retired folks, if they want to bring to the table to work with us to get their sphere of influence at the table, I think that is well within their rights to decide who they bring to the table to help us with this work. I will also say there are 12 members sitting around this table whose job it is during the week to go out and interact and hear the voices of our city at large, and that is our elected officials. So between meetings, we don't have to rely on staff. We should be working with staff to go out into the districts, to go out and hold town halls, to find whatever process we as individual council members hired by the people of Charlotte to be their voices at these tables, that we go out there and do the work and to bring that back to the table week to week. I will say that also that this needs to be continuous work, that this is not something that gets done in 12 weeks, and that is the charge and policy that we are under. What we have here on these week-to-week breakouts, are some of the traps we already set for ourselves week to week that we need to get over. We will not be able to deal with all of these policies, for instance, in one meeting. This might be a framework for a year's conversations. We also might find as that we deal with, for instance, passive protests and peaceful protest definition, First Amendment activities, that's actually a module that we have to stretch out over 2 or 3 weeks. And we wouldn't want to cut something off at the knees simply to fit a matrix of time. So I do think, Mr. Manager, you need to take this idea and the overall charge of safe communities and figure out how do we map this together, right? How do we bring, for instance, if you have 12 council members and a mayor that are going out into the community and bringing back their experts and bringing back the voices of the people to the table, how do you do that in an effective way? You can't really, for instance, we can't deal with that 12 of us bringing those all of those experts at once. So these are practical things that we have to think about doing. So I would say this is a good skeleton and a good idea of where to start. I would resist the idea of, again, taking it out of the council and managers' hands to do, and there needs not be any other subcommittee with a specified time. This has to be continuous work as is outlined in this matrix.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. I've got Mr. Driggs and Mr. Graham, and then as we are hitting the 2-hour mark, I'd like to move to allowing Ms. Watlington to make a motion, which I will ask her to possibly split into smaller motions because I'm sensing more of a consensus around the timeline than I am the idea of a separate committee. So if you shouldn't mind doing that.
I have one more thing. I'm sorry.
Yes,
I will say I didn't totally catch all of the people that you would think that be on that task force that I don't think should be a task force, separate task force. But I do think since that we need an intergovernmental approach at the table. We talked about approaching this from violence and community safety from a public health perspective. We need to stick with that. So we need to figure out, I think, within our council manager table, how do we bring the county into this? And as well as CMS, we have to have the schools at the table, especially as we're talking about programmatic money and getting their input in dealing with a portion of our population that they are probably better experts in dealing with than all of us at the city perspective.
And to Mr. Winston's point, I think regardless of whether it's in the form of a separate committee or not, these are people whose expertise and voices we have to have as part of the conversation. So I don't know whether that has to be in a formal role or not, but they will be a part of that work. Mr. Driggs?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to mention, I think the distinction that was being made about what the committee does and what the manager does is more important than is being properly acknowledged here. This whole work plan looks like kind of an audit or something. And frankly, I don't think we're qualified to perform that audit. I think some of these topics are going to come up, and a whole bunch of people that have no experience in interview rooms or whatever are going to take it upon themselves to say, this has to work this way. And I think the important distinction to understand is we are there to say what we want. It is up to the manager and the police department to figure out the how. And it feels to me like we are headed in a direction here of dictating the how and not just the what. and I just don't think that ends well. We paid $400,000 not that long ago for a police foundation report, which I hope everybody has read, because it reviewed CMPD's practices and policies and came back with the finding that they were absolutely consistent with the recommendations of the 21st century President Obama's task force. So I'm uneasy about this whole approach. I hope, by the way, that this committee, if it does adopt this, understands that it has to go to full council before it can become the work plan of the safety committee. I think this is something that does need to be decided by all of us. The other thing I would mention is, and it's surprising to me, there seems to be a glaring omission here, and that is we're going to get in there and scrub every aspect of how CMPD works. A lot of what we've been hearing from the community is defund CMPD, spend the money on other things. And I don't see any provision for us to be talking about what those other things might be, this plan. And that strikes me as being a very important part of our response to the community. We need to investigate things that could be done outside of CMPD, and we need to come back with a finding that either it makes sense to change or it doesn't, and resolve that issue. So my final comment is, it looks like budget review is anticipated to take place from where we are sometime in September or October. I don't think the rest of the budget process is going to be ready to start trying to incorporate whatever conclusions come out of this into our budget until a time later than that. Certainly based on the way the budget process has worked in the past, as the committee chair, I don't have any context in which I would be able to look at budget recommendations. So I hope we stay focused on a bigger picture and not bury ourselves in a process that could be seen by the public as just that, process. There are some big picture questions here that are being asked. They aren't actually that complicated, and it would be great if the message we could send to the community about the work we were doing was simpler.
Thank you, Mr. Driggs. And
I'm sorry, I'm just turning off my phone here. So anyway, that's the basic point. I would look for clarity and simplicity in terms of how we are responding to the input that we have received, not an overabundance of process, and expanding the scope to include other things in which we might want to invest in response to community input. Thank you.
Point well made as it, in regards to the fact that we cannot allow policy review to prevent us from looking at certain topics that we have charged our police officers with, which might or might not be, they might or might not be the right folks for us to be asking to address those issues like homelessness and others. So thank you for bringing that, making sure that we're reminded of that. Councilmember Graham.
Mr. Chair, I just want to clarify, this will be a vote by the full council before it gets adopted as the committee work plan. Is that right?
Anything that is, well, I'm not sure I'm understanding your question, because
I think Mr. Driggs is saying if you have a work plan that's extensive, that requires a task force and other, it needs to go back to the full council for approval.
So is the assertion that this timeline would need a vote by the full council, or that the idea of creating a task force would need a vote by the full council?
All of it. The same conversation we're having now with all of us able to vote on it.
It would be a recommendation from this committee to council that this is how we proceed to act on the motion that we're reviewing it, to make sure. I think what Mr. Driggs is really pointing out is council, the whole council needs to approve, and so that you don't get down the road and they say, well, we weren't supposed to do this. This isn't what we were going to do. And it's just basically a check-in and approval. But I think a work plan idea would be a good one.
I guess I would ask the manager, I mean, I can appreciate that there is a difference between something as extensive as this proposed timeline and what would maybe be normally undertaken in committee, but I guess I would ask from a policies and process standpoint, where do we draw the line between what is something that a committee can make a determination on in terms of how they'll tackle the work that's been referred to them versus when you would need to seek the majority of council to approve.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So that's why I started where I started, which is number 2. What are the charges to the committee, and what are the expected outcomes? So there were several charges to this committee, and the question would be, is the work plan within those charges to the committee, and how do we move forward from there?
But Mr. Manager, the charges to the committee did not come from full council. I mean, we're in uncharted waters here. I just think every member of council is accountable to the community for the response, for our proposed action in response to the input that we all got.
Well, to be accurate, the charges that Mr. Jones outlined at the beginning did, because the mayor put forward Mr. Graham's proposals, and the majority of council voted for Mr. Winston's, and all of council voted for mine. So those did come to the committee in a proper way.
Right, I think I'm referring to Mr. Graham's and now Ms. Watlington.
Mr. Graham's came as a charge from the mayor.
Yes.
Mrs. Mayor?
So I wasn't really saying it has to be a vote, but, you know, that's why we have the strategy sessions. The whole strategy session is so that the committee can come back and talk to the council. So that's when I was thinking that this would take place, because this is some of the most important work that's going to be done, and we don't want to get off track by saying, well, we weren't aware of it. So my assumption would be at the next strategy session, which would be July. Are we having one? No, we're not having one July the 4th, I hope. But the next strategy session, you would come with the recommendation of your work plan and talk to council and say, okay, is everybody good with this? Because that's how we're trying to stay together. And, you know, remember, shared information, shared decision-making. And that's why I think it's important to come back to our plan that committees report.
So July 6th.
Talk about a work plan.
July 6th would be our next strategy session. And Mr. Driggs, I take your point that the work plan that's been laid out in front of us here might not be considered one of the things that Mr. Jones outlined at the beginning as something that had been properly charged to this committee. I would ask the manager what he thinks the best course of action for us to take where we stand now with what we've discussed.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. So something would come from this committee today to go back to the council on the strategy session on July 6th.
Got it.
So the some things would likely be us voting on, A, the work plan timeline that has been proposed by Councilmember Watlington, and B, the idea of that work plan being charged to a new task force committee.
Yes.
Mr. Graham, I have not forgotten about you. Did you have something else?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment, and then I'll let it go. I tend to agree with Councilmember Winston on a number of points. One, we did have a discussion 2 weeks ago when we talked about sending the information to the Safety Committee about task force outside the organization. This is a hybrid of the two, but the council has already had this conversation and said that the work needed to be placed with the Safety Committee. And so I believe that the Safety Committee should do the work. I think the outline that Mrs. Wallington put forward is really good. I think it needs to be tweaked a little because the work that we'll be doing is going to last well over a year. I mean, this is a marathon in terms of the decision-making process, and I think outside committee members may bog that down a little bit, notwithstanding the fact that we're going to need their voices at some point during the process as we come to the committee and make presentations. But I really wish that we are.
Mr. Graham, I think we lost you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think we ought to keep it simple, simply because the work that we're doing is so complex. And lastly, and this is a aside about the task force, This is something that's been I've been watching for the last 6 months. I believe that we ought to have outside advice, outside support. The council shouldn't outsource its work. And we kind of did that Monday, last night, to a certain extent, on issues in reference to monuments and statues, et cetera, which is fine, but I think we can do our own work and be a lot more effective and efficient and timely in getting it done. And so I support the work plan. I think it makes really, really good sense. I think adding members makes an already complicated topic and getting people around the table to discuss it just a little bit more complicated.
I agree. I think there is an opportunity, and I'll certainly allow Ms. Watlington to make the motion however she sees fit. I do think, to Mr. Graham and Mr. Winston's point, there's an opportunity for this committee, which is ultimately the committee that will make a decision, that will then pass along to council to make a decision. I think that everyone she has outlined, and probably far more, are people that we need to have coming into the committee meeting. For instance, Civil Service Board Chair. I think having them come in to a specific meeting where we can address questions specific to their experience, to their perspective on these issues is critical. And so I would certainly support having these as the starting list of folks who come in as subject matter experts that we can ask for advice and that we can ask questions of. I don't, and this is me speaking as just one council member, see the need to make it a larger task force when we can still tap into the knowledge that each of those individuals has and retain, I think, the efficiency of the 5-member Safe Communities Committee meeting to keep the work moving. That said, Ms. Watlington, I would ask if it pleases you that you might make that motion separately from the workflow plan that you've outlined there, because I think there might be a different amount of support on each of the two, and I would like for everyone to be able to support the parts that they support and maybe not the ones that they don't.
Understood. What I think I'll do, just for, in my mind, simplicity's sake, because it sounds like we're going to have to take a vote as full council on the 6th of July anyway. I think what I like to do is just move it out of committee as a single motion, and then we can tweak it and incorporate what we need to, and if it needs to go as a substitute motion to reflect that on the 6th, then I'm okay with that. So at this time, if it pleases you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make the motion to excuse me?
Well, if you'll go ahead and make the motion, and if you get a second, we can entertain any discussion.
Yeah, sure. So I'd like to make the motion to adopt this proposal with the adjustments that were made during the discussion as is for recommendation to the full council on the 6th.
Second.
So that will be the, thank you.
Second.
And just for my clarity, you are recommending both the workflow plan that's on the screen in front of us and also the concept of the 12-member task force as one motion?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I believe you got a second from Vice Chair Mitchell. Somebody had discussion? I heard somebody wanting to chime in there.
Yeah, I have a question.
I hear Mr. Winston first, and I think I heard Ms. Johnson.
No.
Yes.
Just so, Mr. Winston, for the sake of the motion, let me start with Ms. Johnson as a committee member.
Yeah, I have a question. I've had my hand raised for a while. I don't know if you're not seeing that, but
I didn't. I'm sorry.
That's okay. My question is the process as far as a committee needing council's approval for a work plan. That seems different than the processes that we've undergone in other committees. I thought that, and I can think of the task force specifically that developed a work plan and then goes to council for final decision. So I either way, we can take it to full council before or after, that's fine, but that just seems contrary that we're needing to take our work plan from the committee to council for approval to proceed.
I think the thought there was simply that, to Mr. Driggs's point, and I think the manager underscored it, that this work plan, by I think most accounts, exceeds the charges we were given by the mayor and by votes of the full council. And so because it is beyond the work that we were assigned as a committee, we would need to be properly assigned this work by the full council. Is that Mr. Jones?
Actually, I was posing it under the strategy that we had all council committees at the strategic sessions that we had the first meeting of the month.
Right.
They give a report, they go through the work plan, they ask council informally. It's not a vote that we have on the agenda.
Right.
I mean, it is on the agenda for our work sessions to say, are we headed in the right direction?
Right.
Is this what we want to do? It's not a debate that's a law or an ordinance or whatever. We're just basically, all council committees have given monthly reports, and they talk about the work that they're doing, and people should comment on it so that when we get to remember, committee's 5 people, you need to, I was thinking what we're trying to do is make sure everybody's aware of the next steps.
Right.
And comment on it. And we've done that consistently in the last 4 years.
Okay, and then, thank you. And then secondly, what I see this as, and I think it's a great idea, what I see this as is us bringing in subject matter experts like Mr. Picari said, we are not the experts on these policies. So what we're bringing in is folks to the table that can help provide input. Anytime you are on a continuous improvement team, you want to bring that are experts. So bringing in I would also hope that we could have a police officer, a current chief, or someone table along with Mr. Jones. I think that's the way we're going to move forward, get the questions asked, and be able to actually take action and be solution focused. So either way, I could for today, or if we need to take it before the full council, I'm prepared to support it. But I'm excited about this. I think because Chief Estes said something about good or us versus them. This is not an us versus them. This is not council versus the police. This is not community versus the police. I think we all want the same thing. We want transparency and accountability because we know that if Mr. Floyd had not been killed, the police officer's job would have been easier. So I think it's the goal of everyone to weed those behaviors out, to make sure the community trusts the police and make sure the police have the tools that they need. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. And if I don't, I'm going to go ahead and move us to a vote. We don't have any other committee members, and I think if this is going to be a discussion of the full council, we'll certainly have, and I'm sure certainly utilize more time to have this conversation. But as we approach 2.5 hours, I'm going to ask our committee members to vote, and I will roll call those and start with Vice Chair Mitchell.
You're going to let me speak?
Well, on this one, with it being a committee-only vote, I'd like to get to the vote on the committee. I mean, I agree with many of the points you made, but I think for us to open up beyond the committee when only the committee is about to vote
You told me that I could speak once the motion was made, and now you're saying that I can't.
What?
Can it be brief?
I intended to be brief. I echo some of what Ms. Johnson was saying, in that I don't even understand why this is going to a vote. A charge has been made for the manager to create a process to do this. The manager has not presented a process for this comprehensive policy review process. I understand Ms. Watlington is making a suggestion, but I think what I would like to come back to the full council is staff's recommendation of the clear charge that council was given to the manager to come up with this process, and that is what Ms. Watlington has presented is not that. So I just wonder why we are pushing this towards the full council when staff hasn't hasn't done their part of the work as of yet.
All right, thank you, Mr. Winston. Mr. Mitchell.
Yes.
Ms. Ajmera.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Ms. Watlington.
Yes.
All right, that passes, and we'll come to the full council for discussion at the next strategy session. And to Mr. Winston's point, again, I don't think anything that we are undertaking will preclude us from anything else we need to or want to undertake. And so I don't think Ms. Watlington putting this forward, let's also, Mr. Winston.
I'm not talking about what we want to undertake. I'm just talking about the direction and the policy that we have.
Point of order.
We will undertake that conversation at the council meeting. Again, I fully appreciate having all 12 of us at committee meetings, but it is my intention as we go forward with these committee meetings to, as best possible, and with today being a put everything on the table day, I wanted to make sure that everyone's concerns were heard, and I always want everyone's concerns to be heard, but for the sake of doing the work that the committee has been charged with doing, I do think that the focus has to be on allowing the committee to do the work, certainly incorporating input from our colleagues, but there are opportunities in our process, and I think most of us are process-oriented people, for the full council to weigh in, and so we'll point back to those as needed and allow the committee to do its work. Mr. Manager, discussion of next steps, and then hopefully we can wrap this thing 2.5 hours in.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, what's built into the next steps would be the strategy session on the 6th and the work plan that's in play. The only question that I have, the other items will continue to be a part of the next steps. I do believe, I just want to make sure the committee has not abandoned the 8 can't wait. I don't want to have a bunch of work being done with something that we've moved beyond. So any guidance that we could get from that would be helpful.
It would be my assertion, I heard 2 people say that we can't be distracted by that. I don't think we will be. I didn't hear any of the committee members say that shouldn't be part of the work that staff is doing. And given that 11 council members supported it 2 weeks ago, I feel quite certain that it should remain part of the charge to staff.
Very good. But then we feel very comfortable where we are.
Ms. Ajmera, was that asked to be recognized?
No.
Oh, sorry, I thought I heard your voice.
That's all we have.
All right, then we are adjourned, and I appreciate everyone's time and patience.
Good meeting, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.